Welcome back to these series of lectures on History 2112. This is lecture 17, and the next few lectures are going to have the same general historical context. Let's call it the early republic, the early American republic. Last time we met, we talked about the Revolutionary War, and I want to just recapitulate a couple of things here about the war itself. We didn't spend much time talking about the fighting, and I'm not going to. But I did talk about some decisive campaigns, and I want you to remember the Delaware Campaign, Christmas of '76, when Washington crosses the Delaware, launches a surprise attack against mercenaries, Hessians, hired by the British. This is important because it restores morale to the Army and to the Congress and to the American people. The other campaign I talked about last time was the Yorktown Campaign. Here, of course, the American and French troops surround General Cornwallis at Yorktown, and the key, of course, is the presence of the French Navy on the York River. And here the British garrison is surrounded and they will surrender. This, of course, is the last major campaign of the war. But I neglected to mention Saratoga. The Saratoga Campaign takes place on the Hudson River in upstate New York. Here, the British are trying to implement part of their grand strategy, which is to capture the Hudson and isolate New England from the rest of the colonies. It is, after all, New England where the trouble is, Boston being the center of things. And at Saratoga, the British Army is defeated. This is decisive because it foils the British strategy to separate New England. The American Army captures a lot of British artillery, which they can then use against the enemy. And most importantly, it convinces the French to come in on the American side, providing the American Army not only with extra troops, but supplies, money, and most importantly, a navy. Now, with the war won, the final treaty is signed in 1783, we need to talk about the first government, or forming a government in this early republic. The first American government is called the Articles of Confederation. For a variety of reasons, which we will see, this first government will be replaced by the government that we have today, the United States Constitution. The Articles of Confederation, let me briefly characterize them. They're generally viewed as a very weak government, which is not surprising. The strain of republicanism in the Founding Fathers is very strong. This notion of spreading power very thinly. You need to remember that we just fought a war against King George III, who is regarded as a tyrant, a man that has way too much power in his hands. So the Americans are seeking to form a government in opposition to that of the British government. And the Articles of Confederation conform to these ideas. The Articles have a number of weaknesses, though. The primary weakness is the inability to raise taxes. In the Articles, the central government has to request revenue from the states, hoping to receive it. But a government without taxing authority doesn't have any bite to it. And this government will be rapidly demonstrated to be too weak, too decentralized. The other problems that emerge that are going to cause the founders to scrap the Articles and to create the Constitution include continued British settlements in North America, British fortifications in the Great Lakes area and in other places in the western frontier, continued trouble with the Indian tribes, especially in the Northwest, and the inability to properly adjudicate the conflict, especially commercial conflicts, between the various states. Finally, the proverbial straw, I guess, that broke the camel's back would be Shays' Rebellion. This small uprising in western Massachusetts, led by Daniel Shays, is really a group of farmers who are fearing that they're going to lose their farms. They don't have access to credit, and their mortgages are being threatened, and they begin to organize and march on local courthouses, causing quite a stir. This rebellion, although it's put down quite quickly, it demonstrates to the founders that perhaps the government that they have, the Articles, are not sufficient, are not strong enough to manage the affairs of this young republic. So we see now the movement towards a constitutional convention. Alexander Hamilton is one of the key figures here, so is James Madison from Virginia. They begin to organize a convention in Annapolis, Maryland, there on the Chesapeake. George Washington is asked to preside over this convention. Again, Washington, the indispensable man, the one man that everybody can trust, North and South, a figure of authority and impartiality. So Washington presides over this rather remarkable gathering of American intellectuals, lawyers, landowners, merchants, who are trying to hammer out a new type of government. The question, of course, is where is the power going to lie? Is it going to lie in a strong central government? Is the power going to be distributed among the states? How is representation going to be devised for the various independents, for the various states? How many congressmen, how many senators? The general idea here was to base representation on state population. So states like New York and Massachusetts, who are having large populations, would have more representatives than states like Georgia, for instance. To balance this, each state was going to be awarded 2 senators. The senators would serve longer terms, 6-year terms. Congressmen, these representatives, would only serve 2-year terms. So representatives or congressmen are closest to the people, having to answer to them every 2 years. Senators only have to answer to the people every 6 years. So in theory, the Senate can take the longer view on questions of public policy and not have to respond to the passions of the mob the way the congressmen have to. So the Senate is put in place to sort of check the excesses of the mob and of the Congress. Now, there are a lot of ideas being thrown around here, and we can thank James Madison for taking detailed notes on the consultations that take place during the deliberations to create this new government. So when you want to go back and look at exactly how this Constitution came about, we do have detailed records to demonstrate it. Now, another question is how to distribute this power. It's decided that if we need a stronger central government than is afforded by the Articles, where's the power going to lie? A system of checks and balances is created, whereby a legislature creates laws, an executive or a president enforces the laws, and a judiciary, a court, will interpret the laws and determine whether they are constitutional or not. Now, no one knows how this is going to work. I think one of the reasons that we have to give Washington a good deal of credit as first president of the United States is that he acted in such a way, in such a prudent manner, and in such a way as to allow these institutions to sort of grow organically in the new republic. Some of the early ideas on the Constitution were quite radical. I believe the Pennsylvania Constitution had no executive and no judiciary, simply a legislature, sort of mob rule. And I want you to remember too, and we hear this quite often today, people arguing about what the United States is, a republic or a democracy. And of course the founders would have been frightened of a democracy. Indeed, this is why they moved from the Articles to the Constitution, was to create a more powerful, centralized government. The founders regarded democracy, and you can break the word down into its Latin prefix and suffix, rule by the people. They would have regarded this as abhorrent. This is not something that they would have promoted. They believe that men of some standing, whether it's political standing or standing within the community, matters of wealth and property, learning, that these men should control the fate of the country, and that we can't leave it in the hands of the people, quote unquote, to have that kind of power. Indeed, you'll recall even today, a popular vote does not elect the president. The president is elected by an electoral college. Of course, originally senators were not chosen on the direct ballot. They were chosen by legislatures or by state governors. So this is this government that's created with these checks and balances and separation of powers. This is a Republican-style government where the power is spread very thinly, and it's designed to keep any one branch of the government from abusing your liberties or taking them from you. So let me see if I can sum this up a bit for you. The new Constitution is essentially a compromise on representation, on where the power lies. The new Constitution is promoted by a series of newspaper articles. These, of course, are the Federalist Papers. They're written by James Madison, John Jay, and primarily by Alexander Hamilton. This is really high-level propaganda produced by these men and then disseminated throughout the early republic to encourage the state legislators to confirm the new Constitution. And indeed, this is a successful effort. I'm just going to mention one of these Federalist Papers. One of the more famous of them is James Madison, Federalist number 10. One objection to this growing republic in the United States was that if it grew to too great a size, the government would not be able to comprehend it, would not be able to create order in such a large republic. And Madison argued differently. He said that the bigger the republic, the more factions and more interest you would have. You'd have agricultural interest, moneyed interest, you'd have industrial interest, and so on and so forth. And he said the larger the republic, the more interest would compete for power. And that this competition among these varying interests would prevent any one of them from becoming dominant. So the sheer size of the republic, which in history had been depicted as quite small, city-states, whether in Renaissance Italy or ancient Greece. So the size, the increasing size of the American Republic was not to be seen as a danger by Madison, and this is a terribly influential idea. I want to end this lecture by mentioning that the founders did not envision the creation of political parties. Indeed, they believed competing political parties to be dangerous to the republic, that political parties would have narrow interest to pursue instead of national interest, looking after the welfare of the entire republic. So it's important to realize that these founders did not anticipate the emergence of political parties. They did anticipate the emergence of powerful interest within the republic, but again, the competition among these interests would tend to neutralize any sort of attempt by any of them to become dominant. So in our next lecture, we'll talk about the emergence of political parties. Thank you.